Welcome, everyone. I'm Alicia from Legacy's content team. I will be serving as the moderator for this event. In this webinar, we will be reviewing exposures to chemicals in our environments and our households, how those exposures could be impacting your sperm health and your ability to have healthy kids, and changes that you can make to your own environment and your lifestyle to protect your sperm health and really your whole body health. This event is sponsored by Legacy. So a little bit about what we do here. Legacy is a sperm testing and freezing company. We offer at-home semen sample collection for semen analysis, DNA fragmentation analysis, and sperm cryopreservation or sperm freezing. Really, our mission here is to spread awareness of what affects male factor fertility, what affects their sperm health, and to allow men to really take control of their fertility and take control of their health and their future. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about here tonight. I am Alicia. I am Legacy's Director of Content. I'm also a science writer, and I've worked in this space for about 10 years. I've written pretty extensively on issues of environmental health and male fertility. So I'm really excited to share some of that research with you here today. And our fertility expert and my better half of the webinar is Stephanie Saborin. Steph is a nurse and is the Director of Clinical Services here at Legacy. Her professional background is in urology, specifically in men's health, and she has been working in this space for a decade. She's certified in andrology, which is the science of sperm, and she is a member of American Society for Reproductive Medicine. Here's a little overview of what we will be learning today. So first, we're going to lay the foundation for how to understand sperm quality, how to understand male fertility. We'll talk about endocrine-disrupting chemicals and air quality, and how each of these exposures could be affecting sperm health, sperm quality. And finally, we will end with some action items that you can take to actually reduce your exposure and protect your fertility.
So before we can talk about how to protect your sperm, first you need to actually know a little bit more about sperm. So I want to share with you some of the key metrics that we look at, or key sperm terms as slated here on the slide. So when we're talking about sperm, so these are familiar terms for you. So the first is going to be concentration or count. So this is the actual count of how many sperm we see in a given sample. We also talk about morphology. Now, morphology refers exclusively to size and shape of sperm alone. There's a lot of gray area in fertility, but morphology is definitely what I would refer to as the grayest of all gray areas in fertility. And really, that's just because it's the one parameter that is least understood by the science community as a whole, as far as how much, if any impact it even has at all on conception. We're going to talk about motility. You'll hear that a lot tonight. Motility tells us how the sperm themselves are swimming and moving. And of course, good motility is a key contributor to successful conception overall. You're going to hear us talk about volume. Volume is referring to the amount of ejaculate that's being measured in an analysis. Sperm are actually just a very small component of the ejaculate. It's actually predominantly made up of seminal fluids. And then you're also going to hear mention of something called DNA fragmentation, especially when talking about topics of endocrine disrupting chemicals. DNA fragmentation is really important. A sperm DNA fragmentation analysis is an advanced male fertility test that's measuring the percentage of abnormal or damaged DNA that's carried by the sperm. Now, higher levels of DNA fragmentation might contribute to things like overall infertility or the inability to conceive, recurrent miscarriages, or even potentially poor health outcomes for your future children. So all really important topics. Now, those are some common terms, but let's talk about sperm overall, sperm health, and globally. We're in the middle of a global fertility crisis. Fertility rates have halved in the past 70 years, leaving us literally half as fertile than our grandfathers were. Now, sperm counts have been declining about 2.6% year over year. Back in 1973, average sperm count was about 99 million sperm per milliliter. In 2011, only 38 years later, average sperm count dropped more than half, down to 47.1 million per milliliter. It's 2024 right now, so these numbers are likely even lower than that. So the next natural question here is why? Why is this happening? And the answer to that is that really there are two major factors that are believed to be contributing to these worldwide fertility declines and problems. The first one being endocrine disrupting chemicals, which we're also going to refer to as EDCs. We're going to abbreviate a lot tonight because these are a lot of complicated words we're going to be sharing when we start talking about specific chemicals. Then lifestyle factors as well. That is the secondary cause. Really, today we're going to focus mostly on those EDCs.
Okay, so Steph, endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs, what are they? Where are we exposed to them? How do they affect us? Let's dive in.
So we really need to start off with what is the endocrine system or your hormone system really here. So the endocrine system, if you think of it and imagine your body as a big bustling city. So the endocrine system operates like the city's mail or postal service. So it's made up of these quirky little glands that act as the city's post offices, and they're sending out messengers called hormones to deliver important messages to different parts of your body or the city, if you will. Now, when we think about how hormones fit into receptors, it sort of works like a key in a lock. So it's helpful to imagine the hormone as the key and the receptor on the cell as the lock. So just like every key fits into a specific lock, each hormone fits a specific receptor. Now, there's some specificity to this. So with this lock and key mechanism, so hormones are carried by the bloodstream throughout the body, but only affect certain cells that have specific receptors for that particular hormone. Now, this specificity is crucial for proper functioning of hormones. So then we go to receptor sites. So these are cells that respond to a specific hormone. They're going to have receptor sites that act like locks. Again, lock and key is the easiest way to explain this. So if the hormone, so the key, fits into the receptor site, being the lock, it's going to trigger a response in that cell. Now, there are target tissues. So the cells with receptor sites for a particular hormone make up the target tissue for that hormone. So those cells are where the hormone is going to have its intended effect. But now we talk about those endocrine disruptors. So these are chemicals that can interfere with the body's endocrine system, which is responsible for producing hormones that are then going to regulate these various bodily functions that I was just talking about. So these disruptors or great imposters can work in some different ways. So the first way is that they can block hormone pathways. So some endocrine disruptors can block the pathway between a natural hormone and its receptor, preventing the hormone from carrying out its normal function. So again, think of that EDC as a key blocking the receptor, so blocking the lock, like this image here illustrates on the screen. Now, there's a direct effect on glands. So endocrine disruptors may affect glands, causing them to produce either too much or too little of a particular hormone, and that can disrupt the balance that's needed for proper bodily functions. And the other way that they can impact things is by mimicking hormones. So like I said, the great pretenders that they are, certain chemicals in the endocrine disruptors can actually mimic natural hormones in the body. So when these chemicals imitate hormones, they can lead to sort of overreactions, or they can trigger responses that are happening at inappropriate times, causing disruptions within the endocrine system. Now, so to explain this in the simplest terms I can, because it can get very complicated, really just endocrine disruptors can really mess up how our hormones work and function by blocking their pathways, influencing gland functions, or just pretending to be hormones themselves. Some common sources or examples of endocrine disrupting chemicals are going to be things like pesticides. You might actually have these in your garage or your shed at home now. Plastic toys, these are children's toys or adult toys as well. We'll talk about that a little later. Personal care products, this can be things like shampoo, lotion, or really anything that carries a scent. Household cleaners, carpeting in your home if you have carpets, any sort of plastic food and beverage containers. And of course, you should never be reheating food in plastic containers. I'll touch upon that again in a little bit as well. And also flame retardant chemicals. So these are things that most people think, no, I don't have those in my home, but do you have a couch? If you do, they're used in furniture foam, electronics, children's products, building insulation, textiles, and all sorts of plastics. And then also waterproof or stain-proof items. So these could be things that are in your outdoor apparel, your rain gear, bedding, tablecloths, and even napkins. A less than fun fact here is that we're actually, not only do we have these things in our homes, but we're actually physically consuming up to a credit card's worth of plastic every week. That absolutely turns my stomach every time I share that fact with people. But that is the equivalent to about 50 plastic bags per year. And when I tell people this, they usually say, "Oh no, I don't eat plastic bags and I definitely don't eat credit cards. This doesn't apply to me." But the scary thing is that actually the largest source of this plastic ingestion is through our drinking water. So the second major source of this consumption is it comes through shellfish.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit here too about the fact that it's not just our own consumer choices that influence how exposed we are to EDCs or not, but it's actually, a much bigger environmental issue. So there are industrial origins for many of these chemicals. Here are a couple examples on this slide. Commercial agriculture uses pesticides. Manufacturing uses many endocrine disrupting chemicals, especially if you're manufacturing anything with plastics. They also produce byproducts or essentially waste that can contaminate our air, our water, and our soil supplies. This slide really illustrates how chemicals kind of cycle through and stay within our environments for long periods of time. So, to simplify it, everything that goes into the ground can affect our soil and our groundwater. Everything that goes into the air can affect our air quality and even the quality of our rainwater. So, let's say, for example, you, Steph, use a single use plastic cup. More often than not, that plastic cup will end up in a landfill, and there, the chemicals in it can leach into the soil and the groundwater. That is the water that we drink, and the soil and the water that ends up growing our food. And another example, on the human transportation side, let's say a diesel truck blows that black smoke into the air that you've seen if you pass them. That contaminates our air supply, and it can actually affect the chemicals that come down in our rainwater, thereby cycling back into our groundwater and our soil supply. So this is a big cycle, and there's a reason that these chemicals are often called forever chemicals. They take a very long time, many years, sometimes decades, to break down in our environment. And in some cases, they can actually absorbed and accumulated in bodily tissues, like our own tissues, or even the fat or meat of animals that we might eat or dairy products. This is part of the reason why EDC exposure is very universal across the United States. In some cases, upwards of 90% of Americans test positive for exposure to specific endocrine disrupting chemicals. So while there are things that you can do to clean up your own life, and we will talk about that, this is a bigger environmental issue. Understanding these industrial sources of EDC exposure is also really important to understanding why people in certain occupations, manufacturing, agriculture, will be more at risk for exposure to EDCs. And Steph will go through this a little bit later on. Next, we're going to go into talking about some common EDCs, how we're exposed to them, and what they might be doing to our fertility. Keep in mind that this is very far from an exhaustive list. There are hundreds of EDCs. We highly recommend doing some further research of your own on this topic. We're just going to touch on some of the most common ones and some of the most detrimental to sperm health specifically. So back to you, Steph.
I'll start us off with BPA. This is something that's used in plastic manufacturing. It's added to many commercial products that we see and use every day. This can be things like dental work, dental sealants in particular, plastic food containers, baby bottles, plastic water bottles. It's been used since the 1960s. It can leach into foods and beverages, leading to absorption into the body. And as an estrogen like compound, it can actually cause health issues such as infertility in men and women, obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and even cancer. Now, exposure to BPA is pretty widespread, with most people over the age of 6 having detectable levels in their urine. Like Alicia had said, over 90% of people in Western countries have BPA in their urine showing up. Now, compared to men without BPA in their urine, men who do have it have 4 times the risk of having low sperm counts, 3 times the risk of low sperm vitality, 2 times the risk of low sperm motility. Those are concerning facts. So, to limit exposures to BPA, we want to limit packaged foods that we're purchasing and consuming that aren't specifically labeled to be BPA free. Eating mostly whole, fresh foods is going to help with that as well. Also, think about what you're drinking out of. Drinking from glass bottles or buying liquids that come in glass instead of plastic or cans, even. Definitely being selective with your toys, children's toys and adult toys. It's shocking how many adult toys are made with BPA containing materials. So you want to make sure that if you are purchasing these types of items that they are BPA free. They are not all. So definitely do your homework. Also, again, do not microwave plastic ever, please. Store your food in glass containers as opposed to plastic Tupperware containers. And when possible, you always want to opt for either glass, porcelain, or stainless steel containers for your hot foods or hot liquids as well. So time to dig out that Yeti or Stanley cup,
Mhm.
or just use regular glassware. Now, we'll also talk about phthalates. So, these are chemicals that are used to make plastics be a little bit more durable or more flexible. So, these are often added to products like regular plastic material in things like cosmetics. It can be your personal care items like your shampoo or your body lotion, in medical tubing or equipment. Any sort of plastic packaging that products are coming in, vinyl flooring, even in some food items. How they enter the body could be from consuming food or drinks that have come into contact with products containing these chemicals, so your packaging. It could be from breathing in phthalate particles from the air or touching a surface that maybe phthalates have come in contact with. These things can all lead to exposures. Children tend to be at a little higher risk due to their hand to mouth behavior. Kids, especially little ones, toddlers, everything in the mouth. So these are things you want to be aware of, not only for yourself, but your family as well. Now, while some types of phthalates have been shown to affect the reproductive systems of animals in research, the impact on human health from very low level exposure isn't really entirely clear. More research is definitely needed to better understand the potential health effects of phthalate exposure in humans. It's something that I hope to see more of in the upcoming years. There have been studies done, and studies have shown that measurable levels of phthalates are present in the urine of a significant portion of the US population. So that's indicating that there's some pretty widespread exposure here. Now, that exposure can lead to increased levels of DNA fragmentation in the sperm, along with decreased sperm counts and decreased sperm motility. Now, the next natural question here is, are they safe? Are these things safe to have or come in contact with? And the safety of phthalates really is pretty complex, as different types behave very differently. So some phthalates have actually been banned from certain products due to their known harmful effects on health, while others are still being studied and researched for their potential risks. So we are still coming in contact with these things. My best recommendation really is that you just try to minimize your exposure to all phthalates whenever possible overall. Dioxins are a group of toxic chemicals that are harmful to all living organisms, including humans. They're found in the environment and they can accumulate in the food chain. Now, dioxins are mainly produced as byproducts of industrial processes, but they can also occur naturally from some sources, like things like forest fires. So these chemicals are really persistent, meaning that they take a really long time to break down once they are released into the environment. When dioxins enter your body, they can cause some pretty serious health problems. They've been linked to various issues such as cancer, reproductive and developmental problems, immune system damage, and hormonal disruptions. Now, most human exposure to dioxins actually comes from consuming certain foods, in particular, fatty meat or dairy products, or fish or even shellfish. Now, while everyone has some level of background exposure to dioxins, it's impossible to avoid. It's important to try and minimize these exposures due to the harmful effects that these chemicals can have on your overall health. Agent Orange, of course, is an herbicide mixture that was used by the US military during the Vietnam War era. It was used to kill plants and trees. Contained some pretty harmful chemicals called dioxin. And now, this chemical is very toxic and obviously can cause some pretty serious health problems like cancer, diabetes, birth defects, and other disabilities. Now, even though Agent Orange is no longer used today, the dioxin that it contained still affects many people who were exposed to it during the war, but also Back in 1970, it was banned, but cleanup efforts are actually ongoing even today in areas where Agent Orange was heavily sprayed or stored to try and prevent that dioxin from entering our food chain and continuing to affect both adults and children in surrounding areas, which it is. Most people think, well, if I wasn't alive during the Vietnam War era, this doesn't apply to me, but it's still there. It's still in the environment. So it's really tricky. Also, adults can actually be impacted by exposure to dioxins that occurred during gestation. So, meaning that if you were in utero, in your mother's utero, during the time where maybe she could have come in contact with these materials, or your father came in contact with these things, it could still be impacting you today. Same thing with exposures that could have happened during infancy or childhood. Now, dioxins are absorbed, like we said, by fat tissue. So it's not only consumed that way, but it also remains in the human body for many years. These exposures lead to increases in abnormal sperm shape, so that abnormal morphology, decreased sperm counts, decreased sperm motility, and even birth defects in offspring of men who have been exposed or have exposures. PFAS. Oh, this is a big conversation in my house lately. So PFAS, of course, is the abbreviation for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is too much of a mouthful to repeat. So we're just going to call it PFAS. These are synthetic chemicals that are used in all sorts of consumer products. They've been in use since the 1950s. They've got some unique properties that make them resistant to degradation in the environment. Now, PFAS are found in everyday items. So this is cookware, clothing, firefighting foam, stain and water repellents, could also be in contaminated water supplies or fish that are living in contaminated water supplies. Human exposures to PFAS comes through typically contaminated water, food products, and the air. So these chemicals are accumulating in the body over time due to their slow breakdown. And research studies have shown us that there's a pretty widespread presence of PFAS in people globally. I know just the water in my town is not safe to drink due to PFAS. I live in the suburbs of Boston. I'm not in an area that you would think would have problems like this, but we do. Can't even use your filter. I have a filter in my refrigerator for water, and we don't even use that because water filters don't remove the PFAS entirely. Concerns about PFAS arise from their persistence in the environment, really. So some bioaccumulation in different organisms, and then the potential health effects that come from that. So exposures to PFAS has been linked to various health issues, prompting research into their impact on overall human health. We need more. We still need more. People with higher exposure to PFAS have a 35% decrease in their sperm morphology compared to those with lower exposures. Firefighters are exposed to all sorts of occupational hazards, as we know, that can impact not only their overall health, but their reproductive health specifically. These hazards are going to be things like obviously exposures to high temperatures, but also some of the increased exposures to endocrine disrupting chemicals like PFAS, those forever chemicals. Those are those chemicals, like Alicia mentioned earlier, which can interfere with our hormone function and potentially impact our fertility and do so long term. There's other occupations that we would also consider high risk occupations as far as endocrine disrupting chemical exposure goes. So this would apply to any and all members of the military, especially those who may have had burn pit exposure overseas. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Anybody that works in transportation. So this could be a bus, train, airline employees, even the ticket agent, if you're exposed to those jet fuels, if you're working at an airport. Firefighters, of course, and then agricultural or farming workers, or anyone who works in any sort of manufacturing, also high risk.
The next piece we're going to talk through is air quality. Air quality is actually directly related to endocrine disrupting chemicals because many of the contaminants in our air are themselves EDCs, like Steph mentioned earlier, PFAS. We can be exposed to that through the air. The most important term that you need to know when it comes to air quality is PM 2.5. PM 2.5 is a type of pollution particle. PM stands for particulate matter, and 2.5 refers to the size of the particle. So 2.5 micrometers in diameter or smaller. As you can see here in this diagram, that is about 1/20th of the width of a strand of human hair. So very, very small. This type of pollution is typically produced by gasoline, oil, diesel fuel, or wood combustion emissions. So basically anything that's burning, any engines that are functioning, those types of things are what create these PM 2.5 particles. Because they are so small, these particles can enter your lungs and your bloodstream and your organs, and then pose pretty significant risks to your health. PM 2.5 is measured in micrograms per cubic meter of air. That's a kind of a mouthful. Essentially, it's how densely our air is packed with these tiny particles. PM 2.5 is one of the factors that is used to calculate air quality index, or AQI, on any particular day. So if you've heard someone say, the AQI today is really high or the AQI today is really bad, part of that calculation is looking at the level of PM 2.5 in the air. PM 2.5 exposure is actually a pretty significant problem in most urban areas. The WHO recommends an upper limit of 10 micrograms per cubic meter of air on average. But as you can see, many urban areas, probably most urban areas, have an annual average PM 2.5 level of slightly or even significantly higher than what is recommended by the WHO. In fact, in 2016, the WHO has stated in a study that 91% of the world actually lives in a location where PM 2.5 levels exceed their guidelines. So this is a widespread problem when we're talking about everyday air pollution. In addition to the everyday air pollution, we have acute exposure to poor air quality. Two examples are wildfires and burn pits. The incidence of wildfires is increasing all over North America. Surveys of air quality have found that during wildfires, PM 2.5 levels can be 200 to 500, so that's 2 to 5 times as high than they are on average. So if your city's average PM 2.5 level is usually 11, during a wildfire, it could be as high as 55. So that's pretty significantly higher than, again, that WHO guideline. And if anybody in the Northeast remembers that creepy orange sky that's in this picture from last summer's wildfires in Canada, you will know that the impact of air pollution from wildfires can travel really far. It can actually go hundreds or even thousands of miles away from the source of the wildfire, depending on the size of it. So the closer you are to the wildfire, the higher the impact on the PM 2.5 levels will be. The highest ever recorded PM 2.5 level actually comes at the site of a burn pit. So Steph's going to walk us through burn pits, what they are, and who might have been affected by them.
Burn pits were commonly used in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other overseas locations by the US military to dispose of waste that was collecting on bases. So my husband's a Marine, and as he tells me, when he was overseas, everything was burned in these burn pits. These burn pits are absolutely massive operations where things like plastic, rubber, chemicals, medical and human waste, munitions, petroleum, electronics, everything was burned, all in the same pits. So the resulting smoke from burning all of these materials, some of which are very caustic, created some pretty toxic fumes that service members were exposed to. The Department of Defense estimates that nearly 3.5 million troops from recent wars might have been exposed to enough of this smoke to cause long-term health problems. So exposure to burn pits during military service can have absolutely detrimental impacts on male fertility by impacting sperm quality, also hormone levels, overall reproductive system function, and overall reproductive health. The use of burn pits led to concerns about respiratory illnesses as well, and even rare cancers among post 9/11 veterans due to the poor air quality that was caused by burning the waste. However, the exact toxins in the smoke from burn pits remains a bit unknown because clear records weren't kept by the Department of Defense regarding what was specifically burned in these pits at any given time. The lack of monitoring individual exposure has made it pretty challenging to establish any direct links between particular illnesses and burn pit exposure for many veterans.
One of the things we talk about at Legacy all the time is that people who are veterans, people who have served in the military, are more at risk for infertility. Studies show this than a civilian. There's probably a lot of reasons there, but one of those is exposure to these chemicals, endocrine-disrupting chemicals, and burn pit exposure. There have been several studies looking at the correlation between poor air quality and poor sperm quality, infertility, and other issues. In general, increased exposure to PM 2.5 has been correlated with higher levels of sperm DNA fragmentation, so that damaged DNA that's carried by sperm that Steph mentioned earlier, lower sperm motility, and lower numbers of morphologically normal sperm, and also just a higher likelihood of infertility. So a study of over 10,000 couples in China actually found that exposure to higher levels of PM 2.5 increased a couple's likelihood of infertility by 20%. That's a pretty significant number. The good news is that we do have some control over our own personal exposures. Even though we can't necessarily make our entire environment cleaner, we can control every aspect of what we're exposed to. Studies have actually found that consumer choices do make a significant impact on the levels of EDCs in people's bodies. So they've done studies where actually they test people's blood and urine for the presence of these EDCs. They make changes to their lifestyle. They have them buy different food, buy different personal care products, and test them again afterwards. And they've actually seen a significant decrease in the levels of EDCs that are in their blood and urine. And that is a really important thing for us to take away here.
When we educate the public about endocrine disrupting chemicals and their potential health effects, it can really empower you as an individual to make some conscious decisions when you're making purchases. So by understanding, or at least learning how or where to look for these labels, understanding which products are containing higher levels of EDCs and how these chemicals can impact your overall health, we as consumers can really actively make choices to have alternatives in place that align with our desire to minimize or eliminate these exposures. This educational aspect plays a crucial role in shaping the buying habits, even, and ultimately influencing overall endocrine disrupting chemical exposure levels that we all have. What I want to do is give you some actionable items or ways that you, as a person, can help reduce your exposures to these things. So there are some simple swaps you can make to either avoid or reduce these endocrine disrupting chemical exposures. So we'll talk about things like your water bottles, your plastic water bottles, and your food packaging. So we can do a swap this for that. So you could swap those out for things that are glass containers or stainless steel containers instead. Take a look at your cookware. The coating on nonstick pans. It's the coating in particular that we're concerned about. Swapping out your nonstick pans for stainless steel, ceramic, or even cast iron. I'd argue cast iron cooks better anyway. Think about what you're eating and, looking at your meat and dairy heavy diets, people who are having a lot of those types of items, eating a lot of canned or packaged foods, maybe swap out for more fresh produce. And of course, making sure that we are washing our fresh fruits and vegetables to try and remove any of the chemicals or pesticides that might have been used to grow those fruits and vegetables. Think about your disinfectants, cleaning supplies that you have in your home. Maybe think about swapping them out for more natural cleaners. You'll also save your pocketbook a little bit sometimes when using natural cleaners. If you're going to be, I'm not saying go tear all the carpets out of your home, but if you are going to be thinking about doing a flooring upgrade or changing out flooring, you might want to think about removing carpet and replacing, instead of with new carpet, either wood or tile flooring. Take a look at your personal care products, the items that might be in your shower or in your linen closet right now. You want to check those labels and make sure that you're only purchasing items that say that they're phthalate free or paraben free or fragrance free even. And of course, any plastic-based fabrics or fabrics that have flame retardants in them or stain repellent or waterproofing chemicals. And think about swapping those out for wearing more natural fibers.
So as we talked about, air quality in your area is also a big impact on your health. So monitoring and improving your air quality, keeping your air clean where you can, is also key. So that means, first of all, keeping track of the air quality in your area. If you remember earlier, we talked about how PM 2.5 levels are part of the AQI calculation. So you can actually keep track of the AQI in your area. There's an app called Air Now that is managed by the EPA here in the United States. You can follow that to see how the AQI is looking in your region. You can also get a home air quality monitor that will give you information about your own home's air quality levels. This also means taking steps to filter the air when air quality is an issue. So using an air purifier in your own home, using a high quality mask outdoors if air quality is poor. And the last one here is really interesting to me. It turns out that the dust in our homes is actually a really important pathway for exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals. Many EDCs, including PFAS, including phthalates, can be present in indoor dust in our homes. And this is also why carpets, part of the reason why carpets are such an issue is because they hold in a lot of indoor dust. So air purification, dusting, vacuuming with a HEPA filter vacuum can actually help reduce our inhalation of these chemicals. And maybe this is more motivation for some of us to clean more often, which if you're anything like me, you might need. So I want to talk through What are ways that you can actually improve your sperm, or improve your lifestyle to improve your sperm quality to counterbalance the impact of these harmful chemicals on your fertility? Obviously, we want to reduce exposure, but what else can we do to sort of raise our baseline?
We'll start with improving diet. Improving your diet, there's really no magic food. Everyone always says, what should I eat? There isn't one particular item per se to improve fertility. It's really about just simply maintaining a normal, healthy, well-balanced diet. So eating lean meats, fresh fruits and vegetables, make sure we're washing those fresh fruits and vegetables, eat organic whenever possible, and limit your consumption of any processed foods. Then we talk about smoking habits. So, smoking cigarettes has been shown to have a negative impact on all sorts of things, but in particular, male fertility. So, the chemicals in cigarette smoke can affect sperm quality and quantity. That can lead to decreased fertility in men overall. So, nicotine, one of the main components of cigarettes, can reduce sperm count and motility, making it harder for sperm to reach and fertilize an egg. Additionally, smoking, can damage the DNA in sperm, increasing the risk of any sort of genetic abnormalities in potential offspring. Now, similarly, smoking marijuana can also affect male fertility. And the reason being, and this isn't just smoked, it's edible as well, because it's the THC. So that's the active ingredient in marijuana products that can disrupt hormone production within the body. So that leads to decreased sperm production and quality. Chronic marijuana use has been linked to lower sperm counts, reduced sperm motility, and abnormal sperm morphology, all of those. These effects can impair a man's ability overall to conceive a child ever. Then I'll go to sleep. I would say that most of us, and myself included, do not get enough sleep, but it is an extremely important part of the body's recovery process. So, good quality sleep is needed not only for overall health, but for good sperm health. So, you should be aiming for getting 7 to 8 hours a night of uninterrupted sleep. So, this means turn off your TV, no more Netflix in bed, stay off your phone. For many people, honestly, an extra hour of sleep actually can outweigh an extra hour in the gym. So, really, it's important to try and prioritize getting some good quality sleep. And then we'll talk about exercise. I say moderate exercise really is what is typically recommended. You really want to make sure you're starting slow if you haven't seen the inside of your gym in 5 years, and keep it moderate. If you go over the top and join a CrossFit gym when you haven't, worked out in 10 years, you're really just more likely to hurt yourself by overdoing the exercise, and then you're just not going to be doing anything. So, research shows us that the biggest improvements in sperm health related to exercise actually come from just moderate intensity workouts. So that means walking or jogging for 30 to 60 minutes for, say 3 to 6 times a week. That type of moderate exercise actually yields better results than more vigorous or high intensity workouts do. So the overall message really here is just to go out and take a walk. That will make a difference for you. And then, of course, supplements. So we talked about supplements. We'll talk about them a lot more when we talk about lifestyle in our upcoming webinar. But supplements have been pretty heavily researched over the years, and there is clinical evidence that supports that certain supplements do actually help improve sperm quality. So usually I recommend a few different options, but first and easiest is going to be to find a comprehensive male fertility supplement blend. Something you want to be looking at dosing. They are not all created equal. So you need to be sure that if you are finding a supplement blend, the key thing is that it contains at least 300 to 400 milligrams per day of CoQ10. Write it down. 300 to 400 milligrams of CoQ10. The clinical research supports that it improves sperm parameters across the map. These comprehensive blends also have other things in them that can be quite beneficial. Things like vitamin D, vitamin C, D-aspartic acid, folate, zinc, magnesium. There's a whole bunch. But if you don't want to take a comprehensive blend, you can always put together your own kind of a mixture of a few things, starting with an over-the-counter, just a generic 1-a-day multivitamin, along with a supplement of CoQ10 that contains 300 to 400 milligrams per day. So read those labels, get that dosing right. 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and 675 or more milligrams of something called ashwagandha. It's an Indian ginseng supplement.
If someone wants to understand their sperm quality now and how it may have been affected, what is the best way to go about doing that?
So the first thing would be to test your sperm. By doing that would be to, of course, have a semen analysis done. How semen analysis testing works? Pretty simple. You're going to, if you do it with Legacy, you can do it from the comfort of your home, significantly less awkward, but you're going to be collecting a sample via masturbation. So like I said, you can do this from home. That sample then gets picked up by FedEx from your doorstep. It's delivered overnight to our lab where it can be tested. And if you choose to freeze it, it can be subsequently frozen and stored for later use. Results are available in 24 to 48 hours. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, and it gives you a great idea as far as where you stand for baseline. There's two options that you have when you do a semen analysis test. The first option is going to be just with a standard semen analysis. So this is going to be a report that's comprehensive, that's going to talk about things like semen volume, sperm concentration or count, the motility, total motile count, and morphology. We talked about all these terms at the beginning and what they meant. Then there's also the advanced semen analysis, and I would argue that that's probably the better test when you're looking for issues with exposures to EDCs, because it's actually possible to have a perfectly normal semen analysis, but have really highly fragmented DNA structures of that sperm internally. So that's where that advanced test is everything I just told you about on the standard semen analysis, but it adds in the additional component of DNA fragmentation testing.
And I just want to talk a little bit about an option that I think is important for people to be aware of, and that is sperm freezing. So we know, as we've discussed throughout this webinar, that we accumulate exposures to chemicals throughout our lives. So if we can freeze a healthy sperm sample early, that gives us a backup plan for whenever we might be ready to have kids. And this could be especially important, again, for those folks in high-risk occupations like Steph mentioned earlier. So people in the military, firefighters, those who work in agriculture and manufacturing and transportation, they should definitely be considering sperm freezing. The nice thing about working with Legacy is that you can also do this from home. We can actually take the sample that you sent in for testing and freeze it for 1, 5, or 10 years. It's super simple. Once the sperm is frozen, it is essentially frozen in time. So the quality of it does not degrade over time, doesn't age. Frozen sperm can be used for decades after freezing without really impacting your chances of a healthy pregnancy in the future.